There are so many different types of stuckness, and I think it's interesting to differentiate between them. There is the well-known help-rejecting complainer, the client who pleads for help but rejects the help we offer. And it's interesting because I remember years and years ago, I had a client like this, and my supervisor said, think of her as characterologically depressed. And what I did, which was basically to say, it's her problem, not yours. When he said, oh, it's characterological, I felt tremendous relief. It's okay, I don't have to try so hard. But I think that's really important that we not as pathologize the stuck and resistant client. The clients who are always fine, right? They seem to want to come to therapy, but the message is, I'm fine, which translates to, I don't need help. And then we're at sea because we're there to help. Skepticism, mistrust, questions. How do you know this will help? Is there any research evidence? I love it. What quality control measures do you use to ensure that it's working? And I thought to myself, the quality control measure is the client, right? The client decides, is it effective for me or is it not? But the mistrust doesn't allow trying. I remember Suzanne had a particular kind of mistrust. She would say, what would be the outcome of my doing it? And she says, specifically. So I might say, I believe that you'll get some relief. What would relief look like? Her mistrust was about, if there is any change, is it going to be worse? And then this is an old client of mine who every week came to therapy and sat down. I can just see her sitting on the couch. And she would say, with a very kind of serious, flat face, I didn't want to come today, and I have nothing to say. And then there would be silence. And I had to let go and relax into it because because what can you do in that situation? And at the end of every meeting, when I would ask, do you want to make another appointment? She would say, of course I do. Why would you think I didn't? Now, what does stuck look like? I asked my colleagues to, because this idea of what is stuck, we use that term, but we don't specify what kind of stuck. And here's what my colleagues said. It means I feel angry, devalued, help rejected. I'm doing too much work. I'm being asked too much of. And that is important because with stuck clients, we tend to work harder and harder. Another wrote, with this client, I'm dreaming of dinner or extra consults with the med person. But even the med person is frustrated, making cruel, albeit understandable, diagnoses. I think it's fascinating that we keep hoping the med person knows more than we do. The med person actually usually knows less than we do about this client. Another wrote me, I'm bored. I have fantasies of terminating the client for someone interesting. She isn't paying me enough. Can you imagine our having a stuckness and resistance tariff? Right? You could charge we could add a surcharge to the fee. A colleague wrote, some days it feels like being on the edge of a new discovery, like being with a cranky child just before taking a first step. But much more, she seems flat. It is always hopeless and bad. Every which way I turn, she has a reason why something isn't helpful or is pointless. And that, then we're really stuck. It's one thing, it's with Suzanne. She was stuck, but her reason was not that I was unhelpful or suggesting pointless things. I will give her the credit to say her stuckness she understood as about her. She keeps returning with the same symptoms of desperation and despair. Excuse me, as if what got accomplished last week has somehow leaked out. And we know this so well, where the next session, you're hoping that maybe there's been a little progress, and then it's like you're starting all over again. He has a lot of negative tapes playing, such as you don't deserve more, you're not good enough, you'll fail anyway, why bother, you'll just be disappointed. And another wrote, she also has her constant companion of suicidal ideation, which she refuses to give up. And the last one wrote, I can see her face. She says, sometimes I wonder what I'm doing wrong in this case. Maybe I need a vacation. So stuckness, as you can see, really affects the therapist. And it is much more prevalent in trauma clients than in any other type of client. And why? That has to do with the nature of traumatic experience, not the nature of the events, but the nature of the effects. And we know from research that it's the fact that trauma has these extreme and long-lasting effects is very well documented. We know that a history of trauma is associated with suicidal ideation. It's associated with the likelihood of making a suicide attempt. Interestingly enough, it's not associated with the likelihood of a completed suicide, but increase in suicide attempts. The association between substance abuse and a history of trauma is very dramatic. Less dramatic is the association between trauma and eating disorders. And trauma also is correlated with having major depression, any or all of the anxiety disorders. It correlates with the diagnosis of OCD too, and diagnoses of borderline personality disorder. What we can say is that trauma leaves behind these extreme effects that on the surface don't seem directly related to the trauma. But Judy Herman says they are. She says, when neither resistance nor escape is possible, the human system of self-defense becomes overwhelmed and disorganized. Each component of the ordinary response to danger, having lost its utility, tends to persist in an altered and exaggerated state, long after the actual danger is over. So, very important. Each component of the ordinary response to danger tends to persist in an altered and exaggerated state. So, what are those defensive systems? We share them with all other mammals. We have more ability to cry for help because we have words, we have language. We certainly fight, and humans, unfortunately, being less good at fighting, have relied on weapons. We certainly flee, we run, we freeze like a deer in the headlights or a rabbit in the headlights and try to be invisible. And when all else fails, we submit in humiliation. So that's our repertoire. And in humans, obviously, our clients don't say, I froze and tried to be invisible. They say things like my former client who would say, I spent my whole childhood hiding behind the big chair in the living room. My client Annie says a lot. She says, at the slightest sense of danger, I would run and hide. So, what does it look like when years later our clients are trapped in those ordinary responses to danger? If they're trapped in the submission response, they are still ashamed, they're still depressed, they still feel defeated, they still feel hopeless, no matter what their circumstances. The client's sense of being worthless is unbudgeable because feeling worthless facilitates submission. Some clients are still constantly crying for help. And those are the clients who come to us saying, I've tried so many therapists, nobody's been able to help me. They're always in crisis, always clinging to the therapist as the one source of safety. Some clients are stuck in a chronic fight response. Decades. I was just talking to someone who works in the prison system. Decades later, these prisoners are still fighting. They're in prison because they were fighting and fleeing, and they are still fighting, whether it's fighting others, whether it's through aggression and violence, or whether it's through attacking their own bodies. And then, of course, we have clients who are still fleeing. Very interesting. I'm thinking of a client who fled from one country to another and then back to the first country. Or a client, I remember, actually, she was a colleague who moved 9 times in 1 year. She would move into a new apartment. She would feel unsafe and she would flee. She would break the list and she would flee to another apartment where she again didn't feel safe. So our clients often come to us trapped in these ordinary responses to danger. We could say stuck in them. So, how is this all possible? It's all possible because, as Bessel van der Kolk said, the body keeps the score. But we should add, it's the brain and the body. Because memory is not just remembering events, which we do with our left prefrontal cortex, memory consists, every part of the brain has memory areas. So we remember tactile pieces of a memory, separate from smell, separate from hearing, separate from our sense of space and coordination, separate from the image, separate from the spatial awareness and the coordination, two different parts of the brain. So that we can't really integrate an experience that is fragmented in this way.